But by the time you do all the press, you had to do press after press after you won. And I ran to this party afterward because I wanted to go to the party.
At 78, Sally Field is more than a Hollywood name. She is a story carved from survival, from the sharp edges of neglect and the quiet weight of heartbreak. For decades, audiences have adored her as the girl next door, the defiant fighter, the tender mother. But behind every performance lies a woman who endured storms most would never speak of. Her life is not just red carpets and trophies. It is betrayal, abandonment, and pain transformed into art. And now, her tragedy is not hidden. It is written across a lifetime of wounds that even her triumphs could not erase. Sally Field is not simply a legend. She is one of the last living testaments to a time when acting was not performance, but sacrifice. From the gentle resilience of Norma Ray to the heartfelt wisdom of the mother in Forrest Gump, she has carried the weight of human struggle on her shoulders and delivered it with unflinching authenticity. More than an actress, she became a strong mother, a fearless activist, and a woman with an unshakable presence. Her voice once echoed on Broadway stages. Her presence lit up award ceremonies. Her courage has inspired generations. For over 6 decades, she has stood firm at the crossroads of pain and perseverance, turning personal suffering into unforgettable art. She is a symbol of resilience, a woman forged in fire, her dignity unbroken even as life tried to shatter it. The tragedies that shaped her artistry were never staged. They lived. And behind every triumph lay shadows too heavy for a child, too cruel for a young woman, and too devastating for anyone to endure alone. Sally's story is not just about fame. It is about how one woman bore the unbearable and still stood tall, even as the storm followed her into old age. The most haunting chapters of Sally Field's life did not unfold beneath the hot lights of a Hollywood set, but in the still, airless corners of a house in Pasadena, where silence wasn't peace, it was the language of neglect. Born on November 6, 1946, Sally entered a world already cracked down the middle. Her mother, Margaret Field, was beautiful, glamorous, and busy, signed under Paramount Pictures. Her father, Richard Dryden Field, was a decorated World War II veteran, stern, proud, and too often absent. In 1950, when Sally was just 4 years old, their marriage collapsed. The divorce was not simply a legal separation, it was a rupture that tore away the fragile stability of her earliest years. What followed wasn't rebuilding, but reshaping, as Sally's childhood was bent into something quieter, more fragile, and far lonelier than it should have been. With her father gone and her mother consumed by the demands of Hollywood, Sally was left adrift in a household where love was fleeting and presence was conditional. The little girl who should have been shielded was instead placed in a world where shadows spoke louder than words, where absence felt like abandonment, and where silence grew roots in her young heart. It was the beginning of a pattern that would echo throughout her life. Moments when the people meant to protect her instead turned away, leaving her to carry burdens far heavier than her small shoulders should have ever known. Not long after the divorce, her mother remarried a man who seemed at first to bring stability. Jock Mahoney was a stuntman, handsome, charismatic, a man whose swagger lit up rooms and charmed Hollywood circles. To outsiders, he was magnetic. To Sally, he became the face of private horror. Behind closed doors, the charm dissolved, and something darker emerged. By the time Sally turned 13, the trust a child should place in her caretaker had been violated in ways she could not yet put into words. In her 2018 memoir, In Pieces, she revealed that her stepfather had crossed profound emotional and physical boundaries, leaving her with wounds so deep they did not bruise the skin, but they split something within her forever. These moments were not misunderstandings. They were violations. They stripped her of safety, of innocence, of the very foundation of worth a child depends on to survive. Yet as devastating as these acts were, the greater ache came from elsewhere, from a mother who never asked, never looked, and never stopped it. The girl who should have been fiercely protected instead became invisible in plain sight. Years later, Sally would describe herself as a child screaming on the inside, but no one was listening. That sentence alone carries a weight almost too much to bear. The silence didn't just surround her, it defined her. And from that silence, her need to escape was born. In that vast emotional wilderness, Sally found an unlikely lifeline. Acting was never ambition, it was survival. On film sets where her mother worked, she watched characters speak truths forbidden in her own home. At school, she clung to drama classes, where becoming someone else meant for a moment, she didn't have to be the girl who was hurting. Acting let me be someone who didn't feel afraid, she later confessed. Those early roles weren't practice, they were her refuge. In the early 1960s, at a high school party, a talent scout noticed her presence and invited her to audition at Columbia Studios. To most teenagers, it would have been a chance for stardom. To Sally, it was a whisper of hope in a world deaf to her pain. But before the light could settle in, darkness struck again. At 17, in 1963, she faced a devastating ordeal. An unplanned pregnancy after a fleeting encounter at a graduation party. It wasn't love, nor intimacy. It was confusion, pressure, and silence all over again. Instead of care, her stepfather took over completely, cold and controlling. Without discussion, without compassion, he arranged for her to be sent to a shadowy clinic across the border in Tijuana, Mexico. There were no gentle voices, no guiding hands, just a frightened teenager in a foreign room, left with a wound that went far deeper than the physical. When she woke, dazed and alone, her mother was nowhere to be found. The absence stung more than the procedure itself. It wasn't about a mistake. It was about abandonment, about being treated not as a daughter, but as a problem to be erased. That moment branded her soul. It told her she was disposable. It told her she was alone. Yet from that pain came a spark, a vow that she would not let silence write her story forever. She rose from silence, but Hollywood was not waiting with open arms. Sally's first break came in 1965 when, at just 18, she was cast as the bubbly surfer girl in Gidget. It brought her fan letters, recognition, and a cheerful public image. But beneath the laughter and surfboards, Sally was suffocating. Producers saw her as lightweight, a girl next door who could sell charm but not carry depth. 2 years later, in The Flying Nun, she was catapulted into household fame. Draped in a habit with wings that made her literally fly, America adored her innocence. Yet behind the smiles, Sally felt trapped in a cage disguised as opportunity. Every compliment about her cuteness echoed as a dismissal of her depth. Each glowing headline praising her as adorable left her feeling invisible, unseen for the actress she was desperate to become. Hollywood had cast her not in a role, but in a box. At 20, she was already typecast, locked into being a cartoonish caricature of herself. And so, at the height of her television success, she did the unthinkable. She walked away. For 3 years, she refused sitcoms, let her career grow quiet, and buried herself in the actor's studio under Lee Strasberg. There, she stripped herself bare, dragging every wound she had buried into her performances. The work was grueling, often leaving her doubting if she belonged at all. Yet she persisted. And in 1976, when Sybil arrived, Sally cracked the world open. Portraying a woman with multiple personalities, she inhabited 13 selves, each layered with fragility and fury. The performance won her an Emmy and shattered every preconception about her. Sally Field was not the flying nun. She was an actress of staggering depth, forged not by luck, but by fire. Her climb to the top was steep, but it was in 1979 that she reached the summit. At 33, Sally starred in Norma Ray, a Southern textile worker who stands against corporate injustice. It was not just a role, it was a battle cry, a mirror of her own life. She infused Norma with grit, with vulnerability, with a rawness that came from scars no camera could see. The film electrified audiences, resonated with critics, and transformed her from a sitcom footnote into a force of cinematic power. That same year, she stood on the Academy Awards stage clutching her first Oscar. The girl once dismissed as too lightweight had delivered a performance that defined a generation. But the victory was not just about the statue. It was about the long years of rejection, the doubt, the ridicule she endured to prove that her artistry came from truth. And yet, even in triumph, the industry still tested her. Time and again, she was underestimated, forced to fight for roles men landed with ease. Her journey was not about fame, it was about survival in an industry that only reluctantly gave women a seat at the table. For Sally, the Oscar wasn't validation from Hollywood. It was a declaration to herself. She was enough. She always had been. Yet while her career soared, her heart was being tested in ways no award could heal. Her first marriage to Stephen Craig, the father of her two eldest sons, had unraveled quietly, marked by emotional distance rather than scandal. By 1977, at 31, she found herself drawn into a whirlwind romance that would define and nearly destroy her personal life. His name was Burt Reynolds. To the world, they were a golden couple. His rugged charisma matched with her luminous warmth. They burned across red carpets, the picture of Hollywood glamour. But behind closed doors, the love story was written in the language of control and pain. Burt, at the peak of his fame, carried a swagger that masked deep insecurity. He questioned her talent, dismissed her ambitions, and sought to keep her brilliance in his shadow. When she was offered Norma Ray, he told her she wasn't good enough. Years later, she would stand holding the Oscar for that very performance, but the wound of his words lingered. In 1980, when she returned to the Academy Awards, he refused to attend with her, leaving her to walk into triumph alone. To the world, she glowed. Inside, she ached. "I was always trying to prove I was enough for him," she later admitted. Their relationship stretched into years of highs and devastating lows, moments of tenderness followed by sharp cruelty. In her memoir, In Pieces, she wrote candidly, "He made me feel small." She stayed longer than she should have, clinging to the hope that love could heal what pain could not. But by 1982, the cracks became impossible to ignore. Their final split was not a clean break. It was an unraveling, a tearing away of someone she loved, even as she knew she could not survive staying. Decades later, near the end of his life, Burt would call her, admitting, "You were the love of my life." But by then, she had set down the weight of his love. It was too late. She mourned him, yes, but she mourned more the years wasted, the love twisted by fear and pride. For Sally, love was never a gentle shelter. It was a battlefield, and it left scars that fame could never soothe. At 18, Sally Field landed her first starring role in Gidget, the bubbly surfer girl adored by audiences. Hollywood, however, quickly stamped her as lightweight. 2 years later, the flying nun made her a household name, but the role became a gilded cage. America embraced her innocence, while she quietly felt trapped in caricature. Each smile praised felt like dismissal. At 20, she was already suffocating beneath a label she never chose. At the height of success, she walked away. For 3 years, she turned down sitcoms, risking obscurity to train at the Actors Studio with Lee Strasberg. There, she stripped away masks, forcing her buried pain into performances. It was brutal, often leaving her doubting whether she belonged. Then in 1976 came Sybil. Sally portrayed a woman with multiple personalities, channeling fragility, fury, and resilience. The performance stunned critics, won her an Emmy, and shattered every preconception about her talent. The flying nun was gone forever. In her place stood an actress of staggering depth, her wounds now fuel for art. For Sally, Sybil was more than a role, it was proof. Acting had once been her escape. Now it was her power, her truth, and her declaration of survival. In 1979, Sally Field stepped into the role of Norma Ray, a Southern textile worker battling injustice. It wasn't just acting, it was a reflection of her own life, of clawing for dignity in an industry that underestimated her. She gave Norma raw grit and aching vulnerability, pouring her scars into every line. The film struck a nerve, critics praised her, and she stood at the Academy Awards holding her first Oscar. For the girl once dismissed as too cute to be serious, it was a declaration. She had fought back and won. But victory hadn't come easy. She'd endured years of rejection, ridicule, and producers who couldn't see past her sitcom past. Norma Ray shattered that ceiling, yet even after her Oscar, Hollywood kept testing her, reluctant to offer women complex roles beyond a certain age. Still, Sally persisted, each role another battle for recognition. That night on stage, Clutching Gold, wasn't about Hollywood's approval, it was about her own. She had proved herself to herself, proving that truth and talent carried more weight than charm ever could. Sally Field had rewritten her story, transforming typecasting into triumph, silence into voice, and doubt into the most powerful victory of all. Now, at 78, Sally Field lives not in Hollywood's spotlight, but in the gentle rhythm of Pacific Palisades. Her $50 million fortune means little compared to mornings in her garden, evenings with her grandchildren, and the quiet joy of family dinners. She has traded red carpets for yoga mats, applause for laughter in her living room. The trophies still shine, but the drawings on her refrigerator mean more. Her battles with love, abuse, health, and heartbreak have not broken her. They've shaped her into a woman of grace and resilience. Sally's story is not just about tragedy, it's about survival. If her journey touched you, share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter.